Chapter 10:22. The Fall of Falcon Scott. On the way back, Sonny couldn't help but retreat inside himself. He did not know what was happening on the surface, whether the port fortress still stood, whether the devouring cloud had breached the walls of the city. The very idea of a world outside of the cold, dark, muted, oppressive abyss of the ocean seemed strange and distant. Chances were, he would have to fight again as soon as Bloodwave delivered them under the walls of Falcon Scott. However, Sonny was too tired both physically and mentally to care. He just wanted to forget about everything and rest, at least for a short while. Luckily, the killer whale seemed to be moving much slower as they ascended from the depths. That, most likely, was done for the benefit of Sonny and Neve. Even though they were masters, they were still fundamentally humans. Neither would have died from the decompression sickness, but it could do a lot of damage to their already strained and battered bodies. Actually, Sonny was not sure if he was even susceptible to the bends, considering how strange and tenacious his blood was. However, he welcomed the short moment of respite. Somber and unchanging, the dark ocean remained the same as they retreated from its cold depths. The only difference Sonny could feel was the slow, gradual lessening of the pressure that weighed on him like a slab of stone. With each minute, his body seemed to become a little lighter, and breathing was a little easier. He closed his eyes, allowing the cold currents to carry him. Right, there was a memory. I should probably study it before we return to the battlefield. Sonny was in no shape to fight, but he might have no choice but to join the battle soon. He had to use any advantage there was. He summoned the runes and watched as they shimmered in the darkness, slowly forming into coherent shapes. Before turning his attention to the memories, he briefly checked the list of shadows. Both Saint and Nightmare seemed to be alive. Relieved, Sonny let out a mental sigh and looked up. A new set of runes appeared at the end of the list of his memories. Memory, Shroud of Graceless Dusk. He lingered for a moment. That was the second memory in his arsenal, named after a burial garb. Was the spell trying to insinuate something? Too apathetic to care, Sonny shrugged and continued to read. Memory rank Transcendent. Memory tier VI. Memory type Armor. He closed his eyes again for a moment. A transcendent memory of the 6th tier was the strongest he had ever received after slaying an enemy, of course. It was, since Sybil of the Fallen Grace was the strongest enemy he had ever slain. There was the spawn of the vile thieving bird as well, but Sonny did not really consider that victory a true, honestly earned kill. In any case, the Shroud of Graceless Dusk had to be an extremely potent memory. And it was an armor, too, something that he desperately lacked at the moment. Lucky. Somewhat encouraged, he opened his eyes and looked back at the runes. Memory description. Sibyls were the heralds of the gods and conduits of divine grace. Many mysteries were known to them, and so were many truths. There was one being, though, who knew much more, the graceless caitiff, demon of dread. He knew every truth there was because he knew everyone's fear, even that of the gods. And so, seeking salvation from the end, the Sibyls abandoned the mortal realm and guided their people on a long and arduous journey. They led them far away, across the lands consumed by war, to the tomb of Ariel. There they found solace, safety, and shelter. In time, the voices of the gods grew silent one after another, leaving behind only a vast and dreadful silence. That was how the Sibyls embraced the estuary, and that was how they fell. Sonny frowned. That guy again. By now, he was all but certain that the region of the dream realm where the chain of nightmares had originated, and the Black Pyramid hidden within, had something to do with Ariel, the demon of dread. Was the pyramid really his tomb, then? How would a demon die, and who would build him an opulent grave? And what did the great river that allegedly flowed back in time have to do with any of that? Its estuary was mentioned in the description of the stifled scream as a place where a dreadful secret had been hidden. Was this the same estuary? The Sibyls had been, apparently, some sort of oracles that received revelations from the gods. Once the gods died, those revelations obviously stopped. The timing didn't really make sense, though, because the tomb of Ariel had seemingly existed long before that. Mysterious. With a tired sigh, Sonny tried to ignore the myriad of questions and turned his attention to the enchantments of the graceless dusk. There were no less than 6 of them. Enchantments: blessing of mind, blessing of soul, blessing of spirit, blessing of flesh, sublime silk, blessing of dusk. Somewhat invigorated, he studied the descriptions. Blessing of mind, enchantment description. This memory enhances one's mental acuity. Blessing of soul, enchantment description. This memory enhances one's rate of passive soul essence replenishment. Blessing of spirit, enchantment description. This memory enhances one's ability to endure and recover from mental fatigue. Blessing of flesh, enchantment description. This memory enhances one's ability to endure and recover from physical fatigue. Sublime silk, enchantment description. This memory is woven out of sublime, mystical silk. It is impervious and possesses a beautiful splendor. Blessing of dusk, enchantment description. This memory carries the blessing of dusk, last Sibyl of the estuary. The wearer can establish a mental connection with another being to hear their voice and thoughts, or make their own be heard. Sonny blinked a couple of times, and then apathetically dismissed the runes. Well, I'd say it's a jackpot. The Shroud of Graceless Dusk was an incredible memory, indeed. Its value was only increased by the fact that all but the last of its enchantments were passive, a rare case for memories of the higher ranks. The silk garment would enhance Sonny's thinking, passive essence regeneration, as well as make him tire less and recover from fatigue faster. He would also be able to communicate with other people, or maybe even creatures, telepathically, which was an incredibly valuable ability. If there was one thing about the graceless dusk that made Sonny feel a bit regretful, it was that it did not seem to be oriented toward battle, and instead gifted the wearer with great utility outside of it. That was not too strange, since there were a lot of armor-type memories like that. Still, a transcendent one, even if it was made of fabric instead of steel, would not be too shabby. And he was already thinking about how to use the blessing of dusk to cause savage mental shock to people. Sonny had plenty of harrowing experiences to share through a mental link. As he thought about that, the temperature of the ocean surrounding him subtly changed. Looking up, Sonny could see dim lights through the mass of water. They were approaching the surface. Sonny crawled onto the shore and lay on the cold stones of the pebble beach for a bit, breathing heavily. It was incredibly nice to lie on solid ground again, but at the same time, his body felt heavy and cumbersome. A part of it had to do with spending some time in the depths of the ocean, and a part of it was simply because he was still tired and low on essence. Curse it! He had enough sense left, at least, to let one shadow slide off his body and take a look around to make sure that there were no enemies in his immediate vicinity. There were none, at least not close by. There was only Neve, who seemed to be doing a little bit better than Sonny. The Nightwalker took a few deep breaths, then slowly sat up. We actually made it. Gods, I really did not expect to live through this one. He glanced at Sonny, receiving a vague gesture of confirmation. Sonny shared the feeling. Neve grasped his shoulder for a moment, then asked with a hint of morbid curiosity in his voice. How did you manage to kill that horror anyway? Such a devastating mental attack, even Uncle failed to resist it. Sonny remained motionless for a few seconds, pushed himself off the ground with a tired groan, and glanced at the Scion of Night somberly. Spitting out the essence pearl, he then grimaced and said, I guess it was just fate. That fiend was fated to die by my hand, and so fate helped me kill it. Neve smiled weakly, then looked away. Never took you for a fatalist. That was when a third figure rose from the water. Bloodwave walked onto the shore, his eyes glinting with shades of deep blue and indigo. Drops of water were rolling down his smooth, ebony skin, contours of steel muscles clearly visible under it. The saint remained silent for a few moments, looking into the distance. Then he sighed and suddenly disappeared. A strong gale threw a scattering of pebbles into the air, making Sonny cover his face with his hand. What is that speed?" He lowered his hand and looked in the direction where Bloodwave had dashed. Slowly, his face grew still. "No." Neve's voice sounded defeated. The shore around them was empty. Here and there, a few dead nightmare creatures lay on the ground, their blood steaming in the cold. Snowflakes were dancing in the air as they fell from the empty sky. There were no brood beasts in sight, and the roar of the distant cannonade was much quieter than it had been when they left. All good signs. However, the illusion of peace was destroyed when one saw the port fortress that loomed some distance away. A large section of its wall was torn asunder and collapsed, and most of the lights that had illuminated the battlements were now dark. There was movement in the breach, silhouettes who looked like people walking between the rubble with unsteady steps. Beyond that, Sonny could see nothing else. Remembering the sight of the vast crowd of frightened refugees cowering in the courtyard, he felt his heart turn cold. The battle was over, at least. Otherwise, Bloodwave would have already been rampaging among the remaining abominations. The ships anchored near the fortress were intact, as well. Whatever damage had been done to the port did not reach them. Sonny stood up with a stagger, then dismissed the essence pearl and the nimble ketch. Black threads surrounded his body, soon turning into the gray fabric of the puppeteer's shroud. Glancing at the crestfallen Nightwalker, he said evenly, "Let's go." The two of them slowly made their way to the fortress. As they approached, more details became visible. The bodies of the thralls littered the ground, mangled and torn apart. There were much more of them here than there had been protecting the Terror, thousands of them, all slain despite their dreadful power. It seemed that the defenders of the fort had not surrendered even a single meter of the approach without making the abominations pay a steep price. Sonny saw nightmare creatures of all kinds among the felled thralls, some of them large enough to make him shiver. There were human bodies among them, as well the former residents of Low 49, who had finally found their final resting place thousands of kilometers away from the distant research base. Perhaps they would have been glad to lay on solid ground again, as well, instead of floating endlessly in the lightless abyss of the ocean. When Sonny and Neve walked closer to the breached wall of the fortress, they saw the bodies of the First Army soldiers among the dead thralls, too. Mundane humans, awakened. There were too many of them to count. Sonny felt a bitter feeling grasp his heart. This was a part of his victory as well. He had been proud, gleeful, and elated after killing the hateful, corrupted Terror, happy to receive a powerful memory. However, his victory was made possible because most of the creature's drowned guard had been drawn away by the defenders of the port. While Sonny was fighting the Sibyl in the depths of the ocean, these men and women were dying here on the shore to give him a fighting chance. That did not diminish his accomplishment, however, it did put it in perspective, cruelly so. Suddenly, Sonny remembered something Master Jet had told him once, years ago, while driving him to the gates of the academy. No one can survive in the dream realm alone. The waking world, it's no different from the dream realm these days, is it? Maybe it never had been. Passing between the soldiers that were walking among the bodies, recovering the dead humans and hopelessly searching for wounded survivors, Sonny climbed the rubble to enter the breach and looked at the courtyard of the fortress that was revealed behind it. The refugees were alive, pressed against the opposite wall of the yard and pale with terror. There was a light barricade built to shield them from any potential enemy, with soldiers vigilantly standing guard behind it. The battle seemed to have been the most fearsome just beyond the breach. An actual mountain of corpses was piled up where the defenders had made a desperate last stand, refusing to let the thralls reach the civilians. Sonny descended into the courtyard and looked around forlornly. He found Vern's body soon. The enthralled master was laying on his back, staring at the sky with empty, glassy eyes. His ribcage, shoulder, and skull were crushed by some devastating blunt weapon. He was finally and mercifully truly dead. Dale was laying nearby too. Sonny almost failed to recognize the irregular captain without his bulky armor. The memories, of course, had disappeared after the owner's death, and because the body was terribly mangled. However, the insignia of an ascendant of the First Army could still be discerned on the bloodied sleeve of his bodysuit. Gritting his teeth, Sonny took a few steps forward and kneeled near the mangled body. He did not really know what to do. The wind was picking up, making him shiver. Sonny remained silent for a while, and then said quietly, "You rest well now, Master Dale. You did well. Your nightmare is over. The second week of the siege was over. A few days ago, the devouring cloud had been eliminated. The terror of Low 49 had been slain on the same day as well. More people had been evacuated. More people were being evacuated still. The siege capital still stood, firmly in human hands and mostly unbroken. Sonny was in a familiar office in the underground government complex, the same one where he had met the rest of the irregular officers before the siege started. The office was much the same, with only the image projected on the false window changed. It was still showing the view of the city, only now there were fewer people on the streets. The blizzard was picking up again, too, so the visibility wasn't great. There was also one more vacant chair. There were currently only 3 people inside: Sonny, Jet, and Winter. The 3 of them were not enough for the large room, so it felt painfully empty. Winter's eyes were hidden behind her sunglasses. This was the first time Sonny saw her after the day of the battle with the devouring cloud. He hesitated for a while, then forced himself to say, "Dale, he was a good man." She turned her head slightly and stared at him for a while. Probably. Sonny could not really see where she was looking. Eventually, Winter sighed and briefly touched her forearm, where an edge of a tattoo could be seen peeking out from beneath the rolled sleeve of her bodysuit. "It's all right. I knew that the fool was going to get himself killed eventually. There were 6 of us at the start, you know." She grew quiet for a bit, then shook her head. "Back at the academy. Then there were only 2 of us left after the second nightmare, and now there's just me. I'll probably be dead soon, too. No regrets, though, as long as it's for a good cause." Her voice sounded as laid back as usual, but Sonny could sense a bit of strain in it. "I'm sorry." Winter smiled. "If you're really sorry, little devil, make sure to stay alive. You're too young and cute to die. Reaper, you too try to stay alive. Not that you're young and cute." Master Jet laughed. "Well, if you insist, I'll have to give it a try. Might be a bit problematic, though." They remained silent for a few moments, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. All 3 had been fighting with very little rest in between combat shifts for the past few days, so this meeting was a bit of a reprieve if nothing else. Soul Reaper sighed and glanced at her datapad. "I'll update you on the current state of things. Most of the information has been sent to your communicators, so take a look at it later. The important stuff is, the wall is still holding, but just barely. 3 breaches have turned into 5, as you must know. Army Command expects that we won't lose control of the defensive barrier unless something catastrophic happens, though." Winter raised a hand, interrupting her. "What's the point of talking about it? Let's just get to the actual business. The priority targets, hey, 2 out of 5 are dealt with. Sonny killed the Terror, while the Brood Mommy and Brood Daddy of the devouring cloud were done in by you, Sonny, and Mongrel. That's great news. What about the other 3, though?" Master Jet lingered for a bit. Actually, that's why I called you in today. The heart of darkness seems to have disappeared, so we don't have to worry about it yet. Maybe that thing won't reach Falcon Scott before we retreat. Goliath, on the other hand, was supposed to show up yesterday. He has been moving very slowly recently, however, for whatever reason, so the time window changed. We should expect the big bastard to arrive tomorrow, or the day after that. An uncomfortable silence settled in the underground office. Winter broke it by whistling. Speaking of something catastrophic happening, huh? Are you sure we can handle a Titan? Soul Reaper lingered for a while. Don't fret. Sunny and I will handle him. Saint Bloodwave agreed to come out of the water to assist, too, if we need him. He's not as powerful on land, but a transcendent is a transcendent. Overall, it seems like the situation is not entirely hopeless. The First Army has suffered heavy casualties in the past 2 weeks, true, but no more than Army Command expected. The evacuation is also only a little bit behind schedule. I'd say that as long as Tyrus continues to keep the winter beast at bay, we have a real chance of pulling this off. Sunny shifted in his seat. How is she doing anyway? Master Jet gave him a long look and thought before answering. Her voice was a bit wistful. Well, Sky Tide is doing fine. White Feather lost a lot of people during the battle with the devouring cloud, but her husband and immediate family survived. Roan will be out of commission for a couple more weeks, sadly. Coincidentally, the House of Night lost many awakened on the same day as well. The forces of the great clans here are diminished, but they still pack a bite. Their heavy hitters are all alive. Sunny let out a sigh of relief. He had been somewhat worried about St. Tyrus and Master Roan. It was good to hear that both of them were fine. Soul Reaper yawned, then put her datapad on the table and gave him a poignant look. Back to Goliath, though. How is that project of yours coming along? He stared at her for a moment or two. That depends. Have you gotten those memories I requested? Jet winced. No, there are a lot of sleepers that need to be armed, and a lot of memories being lost every shift with people carrying them dying before having a chance to transfer anything. I'll be able to receive a few in a couple of days, but we probably don't have that long. Sunny sighed, then gave her a bitter smile. That's fine. The project is all but finished. I have a few spare memories as an emergency replacement. It's just that I would have preferred not to waste them. Winter gave them both a curious look. Are you two talking in code? What project? What memories? You guys are not trying to buy a boat on the black market and sail into the sunset together, are you? Soul Reaper grinned. Just a little something Sunny has cooked up in that devious head of his to solve our Titan problem. I'll tell you if we have some free time today. She glanced at the clock, the smile disappearing from her face. That said, you should go get to it, Sunny. Don't linger. Army Command has been known to make wrong estimations before. He nodded, then stood up and spared the two women one last glance. They were probably not going to see each other again until Goliath showed up, and maybe never again after. He remained silent for a moment, then smiled. We don't need to buy a boat on the black market, by the way. My Rhino is a fully amphibious vehicle, so it can take us over the strait no problem. As long as nothing swallows it on the way, of course. Anyway, if something happens, you are both invited, so. With that, he winked and hurriedly left the office. Once Sunny was outside, however, his smile disappeared and was replaced by an expression of focused concentration. This is it, then, no more time to waste. Sunny followed the network of underground tunnels to reach the barracks, and then emerged from them near where the Rhino was parked. Breathing in the cold air, he spent a moment to enjoy the lack of desire to cough. The strange trauma he had received after touching the nightmare gate was all but gone now, and walked forward through the darkness. Snow was crunching under his feet. Weird, is this a good sign or a bad sign? The street illumination in the city often went awry because of the numerous gates outside and within the wall. Usually, the army technicians and civilian personnel would fix and replace the damaged components promptly, but this section was barely lit. No one seemed to have cleaned the snow in a while either. Had the state of the city deteriorated to the point where no one bothered with these things anymore? Or was it simply the result of so many people having already been evacuated? By now, only about a third of the initial 200 million remained trapped in Falcon Scott. Maybe the person assigned to maintain this small corner of the city was already safely across the strait, with no one to replace them. Perhaps it was both. Glancing at the dark sky, Sonny rubbed his face and walked toward the rhino. The last few days had been hectic. By all accounts, he should have been dead tired and on the verge of collapsing from sleep deprivation. However, Sonny felt fine. In fact, he felt rather great. His body was full of vigor and vitality, while his mind was fresh and focused. The reason, of course, was the shroud of graceless dusk. He glanced down, studying the transcendent memory. The graceless dusk looked like a simple tunic of fine, soft silk. He had expected it to be white, but to his surprise, the tunic turned out to be of a rich and beautiful black color, with intricate patterns embroidered along its collar, hem, and sleeve edges with silver thread. The hem reached just below his knees, while the sleeves ended at his elbows. The tunic was tied at the waist by an unadorned cord of black silk, and came with a pair of dainty shoes made of the same fabric, with a soft sole that was more suited for a well-tended garden than wilderness. Sonny enjoyed the fact that it allowed him to move around without making the slightest noise. The shoes only looked dainty, too. The black silk that the tunic and the shoes were made of was light and soft, but more durable than tempered steel. Sonny had tested how impervious it was, exactly, and was surprised to find out that the cruel sight could not pierce the thin fabric no matter how hard he tried. It did not burn, get wet, dissolve in acid, or suffer damage from any other elemental attacks he had at his disposal. Only the sin of Solace managed to cut the black silk, and even then with a lot of trouble. Which was not to say that the graceless dusk could serve as a good suit of combat armor. The tunic itself left his forearms, shins, head, and neck exposed, while the soft shoes only covered his feet and ankles. Worse than that, neither were rigid. While the black silk was very hard to pierce, it did nothing to stop blunt attacks and concussive trauma. The marble shell could deal with that to some extent, but it was still not an ideal situation. However, Sonny did not really care. The graceless dusk did not make any noise and was extremely light, not constraining his movements at all. More importantly, the other benefits of the transcendent garment far outweigh its lackluster defense. The four blessings were a great boon, as well as the reason why he felt so invigorated despite the recent lack of rest and sleep. The blessing of flesh and the blessing of spirit made him tire much slower, both mentally and physically, while the time he needed to recover from fatigue was drastically cut. In the days after the battle with the devouring cloud, Sonny had only slept for a couple of hours at best, and yet he felt very refreshed and energized. The blessing of soul, meanwhile, boosted the rate at which his essence regenerated. That was an awfully pleasant and valuable benefit, especially here in Antarctica. Finally, there was the blessing of mind. That one was the strangest, but also the most powerful. The enchantment did not exactly make him smarter or more insightful, but it did make his mind more productive. It was as though there were several compartments within his head now, each capable of running a separate task concurrently, as long as it was not too demanding. That made simple calculations and analyzing clear information easier and faster. The effect was not new to Sonny, since he had been doing more or less the same thing for a long time in order to control his shadows. He was long used to perceiving and comprehending the world from several different viewpoints, which all but required him to sort of split his consciousness into several streams. However, after doing some research due to the graceless dusk, he had discovered that most people found such a task to be hard or even impossible. In any case, his already deviant ability to partition his mind and multitask was boosted even further by the blessing of mind. Needless to say, all of that was extremely useful when applied to weaving. With his mental capacity increased and his essence regenerating at a much faster rate, Sonny had finally been able to crack the case and turn the devil's needle into a memory. He was not sure that he would have been able to achieve quite the same result without the boost provided by the 4 blessings. There was the 5th blessing too, the blessing of dusk. This act of enchantment was a very insidious one. It allowed Sonny to establish a telepathic connection with another person, or even several, to communicate with them through words and other, more crude means of sharing information such as emotions and vague images. Sadly, he could not simply read their minds, since the communications had to be intentional. That said, the recipients of the link were also unable to refuse it. If Sonny wanted, he could bombard them with the most gruesome and loud thoughts, causing something akin to a mental shock. Those with weaker minds were outright stunned, while those with resilience and discipline were at least bound to be disoriented. Of course, the first person Sonny had tried to communicate with telepathically was Saint. To his disappointment, the blessing of dusk did not work on her at all, probably due to the shadow's immunity to mind attacks. He still did not know what was going on in that beautiful onyx head of hers. And speaking of Saint, entering the dark interior of the rhino, Sonny called the taciturn night forth. She stepped out of his shadow, the plume of her helmet brushing against the vehicle's roof. Suddenly, the massive APC seemed cramped and narrow. Looking up at his loyal devil, Sonny smiled. "Are you hungry? How about a late-night snack?" The graceful knight stared at him indifferently, not showing any reaction. The ruby jewels of her eyes glowed with menacing crimson flames, revealing no emotion. Sonny sighed. "Oh, come on. Don't you understand what is happening? Just emote, please. It won't kill you, I think." Saint remained silent and as aloof as ever, causing his heart to ache. Cursing under his breath, Sonny looked away and summoned the runes. The shimmering symbols appeared in the air in front of him. Name Sunless. True name lost from light. Rank ascended. Class Devil. Shadow Cores 4/7. Shadow Fragments 2973/4000. Memories. Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Extraordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Dark Wing, Moonlight Shard, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Morgan's Warbow, Shadow Lantern, Bone Singer, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Dying Wish, Sin of Solace, Bitter Cusp, Stifled Scream, Weaver's Needle, Essence Pearl, Nimble Catch. Shroud of Graceless Dusk, Siege Souvenir, Incessant Seeker. His shadow fragments were already closing in on 3,000. That was not the important part, though. Sonny studied the list of his memories with a pained expression, then looked down and concentrated on Saint's name. Shadow Onyx Saint. Shadow Fragments, 196/200. He was so close. She was only 3.5 fragments away from saturating the counter. Sadly, there was no time to hunt for memories anymore. There was no time for Saint to slowly recover in his core in case she got wounded, either, which was why he had not sent her to defend the wall in the last couple of days. Sonny could have gone and begged for a few memories from people he knew, but there was no need. He had been prepared to fail to reach his goal on time. All it meant was that he had to sacrifice several memories of his own. The problem was that he cherished all of his memories. They were all useful in their own way. Some were integral to his battle prowess. Some were a form of insurance for unexpected situations. The dark wing and the heavenly burden, for example, were far from stellar memories. However, he needed them in case there was no way to avoid an aerial fight. Other memories possessed useful enchantments that he wanted to replicate one day. Some memories Sonny had outgrown, but was attached to them sentimentally. More than that, he hoped to pass them on to Rain should she become a sleeper. Really, there was only one useless memory in his arsenal, the silver bell. However, Sonny was reluctant to sacrifice it. That was the first memory he had ever obtained, and the first memory he had changed with sorcery. It was also a memento that reminded him of happier times. It's just a dormant memory of the second tier, too. Consuming it won't satiate Saint at all. Nevertheless, he had to sacrifice something. In the end, Sonny sighed bitterly and summoned 3 memories. A heavy kunai, a glistening gem made of polished red coral, and an arrow with green fletching appeared in front of him. The last one was the incessant seeker, an ascended arrow of the second tier he had received recently. It was as powerful as the strike of thunder, but possessed enchantments that guided it toward a single target and enhanced the damage dealt to that sole enemy, which was a real boon. However, Sonny had many other ways to deal high damage to a single target. The second memory was the broken oath. As always, Sonny winced when its soul-eroding aura started slowly dissolving his own soul. It was a great charm that had served him well many times in the past, and synergized perfectly with Saint's immunity to soul attacks. Its power as an awakened memory of the first tier was not great, though. With the caliber of enemies Sonny was facing these days, it was like a drop in the ocean. Aside from that, Saint was mostly fighting alongside Nightmare now, and would hopefully be surrounded by more shadows in the future. The others did not possess the same immunity, which limited the usefulness of the red gem. The first memory Sonny summoned was the prowling thorn. He sighed again, looking at the kunai with regret. There was nothing wrong with the throwing dagger, and they had gone through a lot together, but it had outlived its usefulness. Sonny would have preferred to keep the prowling thorn simply for utility, but the situation demanded he let go of something. Sonny had already lost the patient avenger, and now he was going to lose 3 more perfectly fine memories. He felt as if his heart was bleeding. Waste, such a waste. He closed his eyes, and then handed the dagger, the gem, and the arrow to Saint without looking. Here, you eat these. Enjoy your meal. The graceful Onyx Knight silently took the memories and crushed them in her fists without pausing even for a moment. Hearing the dreadful sound, Sonny was stunned. She didn't even hesitate. Those were very precious, damn it. Opening his eyes, he saw 4 streams of radiant sparks being absorbed into the shadow's body. Then, her eyes flashed with dark glee. The runes still hung in the air, the counter showing. Shadow fragments, 200/200. In the next moment, the shadow that existed where Saint's soul should have been suddenly rippled. The 4 dark embers in its depths shone with lightless radiance, and wisps of black flames rose from her armor. Sonny took a step back, mesmerized by the familiar scene. He had already seen it once, back when his taciturn knight ascended. In the next moment, Saint's figure was enveloped entirely by the black flames, making it impossible to see her. A powerful gust of wind blew through the interior of the rhino, both unbearable heat and chilling coldness assaulting Sonny at the same time. He blinked. Oh crap, maybe I should have done this in the Soul Sea. But there was nothing he could do now but wait. Nervous for his expensive APC, Sonny summoned a barrier of shadows to surround Saint. A minute passed in tense silence, then 2. Then something exploded within the barrier, shattering it easily and sending Sonny flying back. A wave of darkness rolled through the rhino, turning its interior into a mess and cracking its armored windows from within. The enormous vehicle shook and trembled, then grew still with a loud groan. Sonny scrambled back to his feet and stared at Saint, who was standing in the same spot, seemingly unchanged. However, the darkness dwelling within her was now much deeper and more frightening. Her onyx body was radiating a sense of vast, dreadful power, and the menacing crimson flames dancing in her ruby eyes were brighter. His shadow, now a transcendent devil, tilted her head slightly, looking at him with her usual indifference. But Sunny could feel a hint of emotion hidden behind it. Pride, satisfaction, gratitude. Slowly, a wide grin appeared on his face. Sunny brushed the graceless dusk, straightened, and looked at the menacing devil with a smile. Should I start calling you Saint now, huh? His shadow was a transcendent now. Sunny found it hard to believe. Even though he had been the one who made her transcendence possible, it was just that saints held a special place in human culture. They were the epitome of vast and unobtainable power. They were more demigods than people, enigmatic and awe-inspiring, so distant as to almost be ineffable. He was now a master himself, and on top of that, one of the strongest there was. But even still, a huge gap separated Sunny from someone like Sky Tide or Bloodwave, which he did not dare test. To think that a similar existence now served him, it was hard to comprehend. Saint's transcendence, without a doubt, marked a new chapter in Sunny's rise to power. Of course, it was unclear where the Onyx Knight was truly equal to the mighty saints of the human race. In terms of purely physical prowess, she was at least on par with them, and most likely far superior. Her skill was outstanding, as was her talent and willpower. After all, Saint had always been outstanding. She often triumphed over adversaries that were much more powerful than her. But so were human transcendents. There was no such thing as an average saint. Each and every one of them were the absolute best of the human race, battle-hardened warriors of utmost talent, resolve, and ability, with thousands upon thousands of bloody fights under their belt. There was also one fundamental difference between humans and creatures, such as his shadow. Humans possessed aspects, while creatures did not. Saint had just gained her powers, wielding elemental darkness to strengthen her body and her weapons. However, every human transcendent wielded a powerful aspect and was armed with several potent abilities, including the transformation. They were also all carriers of the nightmare spell. Simply put, Sunny did not know who would end up victorious if Saint fought a human transcendent. He had a feeling that, by herself, the Onyx Knight would lose. However, if she was augmented by his shadows, the result might be very different. Luckily, he had no intention of combating Saints anytime soon. Dismissing the shadow, Sunny sighed and spent some time cleaning up the mess her transcendence had made of the interior of the Rhino. The APC was in a sorry state, but still functional. See, the day is only getting better and better. Or was it night? Here in Antarctica, it was always night, so sticking to the old notion of time was getting harder and harder. He made himself a late supper or an early breakfast and settled in the lounge area for a few minutes. After a while, his communicator made a familiar sound. It seemed that the siege capital's communication array had activated, as it usually did twice a day, sending packets of data to those with a bandwidth quota. Sunny looked at the new message with some relief. Rain was doing fine, it seemed. Her response was shorter than usual, but she was obviously not experiencing any symptoms of being infected by the spell. He had always been worried about his sister, and after observing so many mundanes being killed by the first nightmare here in Antarctica, and having killed many monstrous abominations their bodies had turned into, that worry only grew stronger. Sunny sighed. She's okay. She's safe. There is no reason for her to contract the spell to begin with, and even if she does, Serpent is with her. Sunny missed his serpentine shadow. It would have been tremendously useful during the Southern Quadrant campaign, considering how dire his need for essence had been from day one in this cold hell. Not to mention the versatile and powerful nature of Serpent's abilities. And yet, Sunny had not regretted leaving it with Rain even once. Her safety took precedence, and he had many other ways to protect himself. If anything, experiencing the bitter hardships of the Antarctica campaign without the serpent had given him an opportunity to learn how to manage his essence with utmost efficiency, as well as vastly improve his control over it. Thinking of his shadows, Sunny suddenly felt curious about their relationship to his class. Even though the soul serpent was currently away, each of the shadows occupied one of his cores. Did it mean that he would only ever be able to control 7 of them at most? If that were the case, maybe the dismal rate at which he received echoes was not such a terrible thing. He might have been very upset if someone like Kurt, the awakened psychopath he had killed in the waking world, prevented him from turning Nightmare into one of his shadows. That time, his dislike of the man, and of the idea of owning human echoes, had prevented Sunny from wasting fragments on the transformation, but he would have caved in if given a better opportunity. Or wait, would he have even been able to make Kurt into a shadow without losing Saint or Serpent? He was just an awakened monster back then, possessing only 2 shadow cores. I'm rambling. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, staring into the distance. He was thinking about unnecessary things to distract himself from what was about to come. Goliath was approaching, the creature that had almost killed him once. The fallen Titan had already destroyed one siege capital, so there was a real chance that Falcon Scott would be destroyed by the abominable giant as well. Sunny and Jet were determined to slay the gargantuan creature of stone, but anything could happen. Even if their preparations worked, there was no telling what damage would be done to the city wall before the Titan perished, if he perished. This day might turn out to be the last day for many, many people, maybe even Sunny himself. He closed his eyes for a moment. Over my dead body, well, obviously that's kind of a given. With that, Sunny forced a pale smile onto his face and picked up his communicator. His response to Rain did not contain any of the grave worries that gnawed at him. Even though she was smart enough to read between the lines, Sunny made an effort to hide the ugly truth as well as he could. That was for his benefit, too. While writing messages to Rain, Sunny was almost able to believe in his own lies. Not knowing the truth was a solace some time later. The members of his cohort approached the Rhino. Belle, Dorn, Samara, Kimmy, Luster. Walking inside, they froze for a moment, studying the upturned interior of the APC and the cracks in its armored windows with stunned expressions. After a while, Luster cleared his throat. Sir, what happened?" Sunny gave him a deadpan look. "I had a lady over, she transcended." The young man laughed nervously. "Ah, good one, sir." After that, he practically ran to the pilot's cabin to check on the internal systems of the Rhino. As Luster went through the diagnostics, he kept mumbling under his nose. Gods, did he crash it into a Titan? This damage, oh my poor baby. Sunny shook his head and addressed the rest of his soldiers, speaking loudly enough for Luster to hear, as well. "Prepare yourselves. Army Command is certain that Goliath will reach the city either today or tomorrow. In any case, we won't be leaving the wall until he does. This is going to be the big one, guys." His soldiers grew somber, their eyes full of calm determination. Sunny nodded. "Don't worry about the Titan himself. Colonel Jet and I will take care of the big bastard. However, Goliath is not going to show up alone, and judging by how Erebus Field fell, there is a big chance that the wall will be breached. I don't need to tell you how important it is to prevent the nightmare creatures from getting inside. However, if the situation becomes hopeless, be ready to retreat to the secondary line of defense within the city." He paused for a moment, looking at them with a serious expression. "Don't be stupid and die an unnecessary death. I need you alive to fight tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the day after that. Dying might as well be considered desertion at this point. No one is allowed to die without my permission. Understood? The members of his cohort grinned, then saluted. Yes, sir. Wouldn't think of it. I am scared of you way more than I'm scared of death, sir. I wouldn't dare. Sonny blinked a couple of times at that last one, then nodded. That's great, let's go then. Soon the rhino started and moved forward with some effort. They drove across Falcon Scott, where a lot of streets were now empty and a lot were unlit. Snow piled high in some areas, and in others, crowds of refugees were anxiously hurrying through the cold. Luster was stubbornly sticking to only the well-illuminated roads, for some reason, which made the progress a bit slow. The wall steadily grew closer and closer. Before they reached the secondary defense ring, however, Sonny suddenly ordered him to stop the APC. The young man looked back with a silent question. Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then said, "Wait for me here, I won't be long." With that, he left the rhino and walked toward a familiar dormitory tower, which happened to be nearby. No one was cleaning the snow in front of its entrance this time. Sonny stood there for a minute or two, staring at the flimsy doors with a grim expression. Eventually, he sighed. Even if the whole city is destroyed, this damned dormitory must remain standing. I'll make sure of it. With that, he turned around and started walking away. When he did, however, he almost stumbled into someone approaching the dormitory. "Watch where you're going, Sonny." He sighed and looked up, noticing Bate and Professor Obel. They must have been returning from their own shifts, Bate at the volunteer center, the old man at the engineering wing of the government complex. The young woman blinked a couple of times, staring at him with surprise. Before Sonny could come up with something to say, she asked, "Aren't you cold?" He opened his mouth, then looked down at the thin silk tunic covering his body. Indeed, it did not look exactly like something a person should be wearing in the middle of winter. Sonny cleared his throat. "I'm not actually. Elemental resistance, you know." Bates scoffed. "You're still a human, are you not? Put something warm on, for spell's sake. I imagine fighting on the wall with a running nose is not a great idea. Ascended snot is still snot." He looked at her silently for a few moments, then suddenly laughed. "Ah, yes, I'm still a human, that's true, thanks. I'll try to remember that." Professor Obel took a step forward, smiling. "Were you on your way to visit us, Major Sunless? Come, come, there's no point in standing here in the cold." Sonny smiled, then lightly shook his head. "No, I was actually on my way to start the shift on the wall. Army Command is expecting a big fight, so it's all hands on deck. Well, even more so than usual. In any case, make sure to remain inside and be careful in the next day or so. Things might get a little hectic." The old man nodded with a sigh. "I see. Well, we won't keep you then. Please stay safe." He moved forward, but then paused and patted Sonny on the shoulder. "Ah, maybe you'll stop by after your shift then. It's nothing much, but Bate received a bit of extra rations today. We are planning to cook up a feast for everyone who is still waiting for a ticket in our block. I will save you a portion." Sonny remained silent for one moment too long, then shrugged. "Why not? It's a promise." He watched Professor Obel and Bate disappear inside, then slowly turned around and walked back toward the rhino. As he walked, the smile disappeared from his face, replaced by a dark, ruthless expression. Deep shadows nestled in his eyes. "It's time to kill a titan." What happened at Erebus Field could not be allowed to repeat itself. Goliath had to die, and Sonny was just the person to kill him. An eye for an eye, a death for a death. Sonny was a very petty and vindictive person, and the two of them, they had a score to settle. The winds were howling as they crashed into the colossal bulwark of the city wall. The soldiers of the First Army were shivering on the battlements, staring into the hazy mist of the blizzard with grim expressions. These were the lucky ones. The less fortunate were far below, on the ground, ready to defend the breaches with their lives. Because of the ugly rifts in the defensive barrier of the city, the logistics of the siege had become much harder. Today, it was especially so, since no one knew the direction from which the Titan was going to attack. Goliath could come from the south, marching across the ravaged landscape and shaking the earth with his every step. He could come from the north, emerging from below the dark waves to attack the port fortress first. For all army command knew, he could even crawl from under the ground. The scope of the Titan's abilities was still a mystery. That was why the defenders were dispersed along the whole perimeter of the wall, instead of congregating at one or several of its sections. However, Sunny and Jet, as well as their two cohorts of irregulars, had found themselves in a familiar spot, right above the main entrance of the siege capital, not too far away from the nightmare gate that had torn through the wall not too long ago. Sunny was sitting with his back against the alloy parapet, meditating. Soul Reaper was standing nearby, looking across the vast killing field, the landscape obscured by the veil of snow. Both were trying to ignore the whispers of the call. It was more than a bit annoying to have to deal with it on top of the sickening anxiety of waiting for the start of the battle. Sunny sighed, then looked up at Master Jet. His hair was getting in the way, so he brushed it aside. Before he could speak, she suddenly asked, "Why don't you cut it?" He coughed in embarrassment. "Oh, the thing is, mundane scissors and auto barbers stopped working on me. I should probably just use a sharp memory and cut it myself. Yeah, that's what I'll do, one of these days." Jet looked away with a smile. "I know a guy back in NQSC. He's very in demand, as one of the few awakened hair stylists around. There are many saints among his clientele, but if you want, I can get you a recommendation." Sunny laughed. "Sure, when we're back in NQSC." He remained silent for a few moments, then asked, "How sure are you that we'll be able to destroy Goliath?" Soul Reaper hesitated. "As long as you pull off your part of the plan, pretty sure. Bloodwave will step in if something goes wrong, too. It's a shame that Sky Tide is away fighting the winter beast again, but we should be all right without her." Sunny nodded. "I think so." However, Jet interrupted him by raising a hand. He grew quiet and raised an eyebrow. She looked into the darkness with a calm expression. "Listen." Sunny did so, hearing nothing but the wind and the stifled breaths of the thousands of soldiers surrounding them. Then, a muffled sound reached his ears from somewhere far away. Boom! And then, after a long and arduous pause, again. Boom! Sunny stood up, staring into the blizzard. Suddenly, he felt a chill creeping up his spine. "He's coming." From a vast distance, the thunderous steps of the colossal giant were rolling over the world. Even though the soldiers could not see anything because of the raging snowstorm, the sound alone made them pale and grasp their weapons with trembling hands. Boom, boom, boom. Each one assaulted them, almost like a mental attack. Jet tried to contact Army Command, then cursed when the interference made it impossible. Calling out one of the messengers, she said tersely, "Inform the HQ that Goliath is approaching from the south. We need reinforcements here as soon as possible. Go." The pale-faced messenger saluted and disappeared from view, and then there was nothing for them to do but wait. By Sunny's side, the members of his cohort were preparing for battle. Everyone around was doing the same, and from the impenetrable white haze beyond the wall, the steps of the giant continued to boom, slowly growing louder and closer, and much more frightening. Boom! And then, after a torturous span of silence, again. Boom! Sunny gritted his teeth, and on the battlement behind him, 4 shadows shivered. Hidden in the blizzard, Goliath was slowly approaching Falcon Scott. No one could see him, but the heavy steps of the Titan sounded like foreboding war drums. Soon, the ground started shaking with each of them. The tremors traveled through the alloy structure of the city wall, making it vibrate. Sonny felt his body growing stiff, as if paralyzed by the memory of being crushed and broken by the giant's foot. Humans could not really recall pain, but remembering the feeling of being hurt was very easy, especially if one was hurt terribly. He had almost died that day. He should have died, if not for a couple of memories and a bit of luck. His body remembered being destroyed. Snarling, Sonny shook off the paralyzing fear and peered into the blizzard, hoping to see the hateful shape of the walking mountain. Instead, he just heard, boom, boom, damnation, boom, boom. Suddenly, the thunderous step stopped. A moment later, a rift appeared in the wall of the blizzard, and for a few moments he could see far and wide. Sonny's eyes narrowed. Out there at the edge of the killing field, a giant creature stood in front of the mountains. Taller than the city wall by far, the Titan looked like a mountain himself. His vaguely humanoid body was broad and misshapen, made of uneven, weathered stone. He had 3 mighty arms, and one enormous eye that stared at the soldiers of the First Army with an alien, cold, terrifying malice. The milky eye was completely white, having no iris and no pupil. Behind and around the Titan, a vast and dark sea of bodies was undulating as it flowed down from the slopes of the mountains. Nightmare creatures, a stunningly large horde of them, were following the fallen Titan. For a moment, the world seemed frozen. In that dreadful instant, Sonny forced himself to smile. All of it him coming to Antarctica, marching with the First Army across its cold expanse, surviving Low 49, clawing his way back north with a train of refugees. The long weeks of fighting at Falcon Scott had been for this moment. He looked at Goliath with murderous intensity. "Come here, bastard." In the next moment, as if answering his call, the giant stepped forward. As soon as Goliath took a step forward and the wall vibrated under Sonny once again, he called upon Saint. By his side, Master Jet mounted the parapet of the battlement, clinging to it with one hand and ready to push herself away. In her other hand, the slender glaive weaved itself from snowflakes. The sea of nightmare creatures flowed forward, overtaking the marching colossus. The familiar thunder of discharging rail guns tore the snowstorm apart, and the turrets joined them a moment later, drowning the world in a roaring cacophony. A tall and graceful figure clad in onyx armor stepped onto the wall from the shadows. Instantly, her fearsome presence permeated the air, making soldiers turn around and crane their necks, staring at the menacing black knight in fright. Saint's ruby eyes flashed with cold crimson flames. Someone yelled, "It's Mongrel! Mongrel is here! Thank the gods!" Their calls rolled across the wall, and the soldiers that had been shaken by the terrible visage of the marching Titan regained some of their confidence. Even though Saint was dwarfed by the looming shapes of bulky MWPs, at that moment, she seemed much greater than the towering machines. "Show that ugly boulder who's in charge, Mongrel." As for Sonny, no one paid him much attention. Whatever fame he had earned among the fighters of the First Army paled in comparison to his flamboyant alter ego. After all, unlike him, Mongrel was a mysterious character. People were free to fill in the blanks using nothing but their imaginations, and the things they came up with were always much more fantastical than the truth. Well, at least the version of the truth about Sonny that he shared with the world. The actual truth was so outlandish that no one would probably believe it. Doesn't matter. Watching Goliath walk forward, Sonny summoned a very special memory, the one he had worked so hard to create, his payback gift to the stone giant. The siege souvenir. Suddenly, a very lengthy and sharp javelin appeared in Saint's hand. It was about 3 meters long, incredibly heavy, and entirely white. A sense of immense, wild, destructive power radiated from the white javelin, making even Sonny himself feel slightly uncomfortable. Of course, the javelin was the quill of the corrupted devil he had collected from an army warehouse a long time ago. The thing Sonny had spent most of his free time in Falcon Scott trying to enchant. The siege souvenir was now a transcendent memory, and a very special one at that. Several transcendent soul shards, as well as rivers of essence that formed numerous shadow strings, had gone into its creation. The long javelin possessed only two enchantments. The first one was Death Dealer, which Sonny had copied from Morgan's warbow. Bestowing that one to the devil's needle had been hard, but also somewhat straightforward. The difficulty Sonny had met was merely one of scope. Of all the enchantments he had learned and recreated before, that one was the vastest and most difficult. However, there was no alternative. Death Dealer was the most destructive single-target enchantment in his arsenal, and so nothing else would have done. It was also extremely, dreadfully gluttonous in its consumption of essence. But not gluttonous enough as far as Sonny was concerned. That was where the second enchantment he had bestowed on the siege souvenir came in. That one had no name, because it was invented by him. Creating it was not technically hard, but required Sonny to teach himself an entirely new facet of weaving, as well as accomplish something he had never done before, not simply copy, but disassemble and heavily modify an existing enchantment. The enchantment that had served as the basis was the Unbroken of the Midnight Shard. It allowed the wielder access to a vast reservoir of power when at death's doorstep, as long as the wielder refused to surrender and kept fighting against overwhelming odds. Sonny was not interested in augmenting the javelin with additional power, nor was he interested in creating a limitation tied to how close someone was to death or their character. What he was interested in was the reservoir itself. After all, Death Dealer had to be powered by something. And so, Sonny had spent many arduous hours studying the weave of the Unbroken, trying to understand how it worked, what element of the tapestry of ethereal strings was responsible for which part of it, and how to isolate the effect he wanted to achieve, how to create a reservoir of power that could feed the siege souvenir from the inside. In the end, with the timely help of the graceless Dusk, he had succeeded in both of his undertakings. The white javelin was much longer and heavier than an arrow, in fact. Calling it a javelin was somewhat misleading, since it was more akin to a projectile worthy of a siege engine. Nevertheless, it possessed the capacity to deliver the same devastating force as an arrow sent flying with the help of the Death Dealer, only at a much greater scale. A lot of power was needed to achieve that effect, much more power than anyone in Falcon Scott could have supplied in one go. That was why Sonny had enchanted the siege souvenir to possess an independent reservoir of essence, and siphoned a sea of it into the javelin over the days. He had basically created an entirely new type of memory. Weak memories usually possessed passive enchantments that were powered by the ambient essence used to manifest the memory. Powerful memories usually possessed active enchantments that required the wielder to manipulate and spend their own essence in order to use them. The siege souvenir, meanwhile, possessed a dire enchantment that fed directly on the javelin's own essence. The result of his hard work was a tremendously powerful memory. It was so powerful, in fact, that only refined material harvested from a corrupted creature could withstand the dreadful enchantments. Anything less would have disintegrated under strain. Even then, the siege souvenir was bound to be a one-use memory. The quill of the corrupted devil was not going to survive the release of its own destructive power. There was one last hurdle to overcome to make use of it, though. Not just anyone could wield it. Even Sonny himself was not strong enough to make use of his creation in the intended way. That was why he had needed Saint to evolve. He needed a transcendent being to bring forth the siege souvenir's potential. And now he had won. Goliath walked forward, the world quaking under the weight of his steps. The sea of nightmare creatures was flowing past his titanic feet, and all around them the furious blizzard was slowly retreating, the winds dying down as pale starlight washed over the vast killing field. On the tall, broken wall of the city, thousands of turrets were roaring as they sent rivers of bullets into the attacking horde. The moonless night was torn apart by the glow of overheated barrels, the shine of swift tracer rounds, and the flashes of railgun rounds striking their targets in a conflagration of force, heat, and blinding light. A few of those heavy tungsten rounds had hit Goliath, only to disintegrate fruitlessly, without leaving even a scratch on the stone hide of the menacing Titan. The soldiers of the First Army trembled as they joined the barrage, the mundane soldiers, the awakened, the towering war platforms, the few masters that were still alive after 2 weeks of the dreadful siege. On the ground near the breached sections of the wall, others were shivering as they craned their necks to stare at the approaching Titan. However, Sonny remained still. Closer, get closer. He was perhaps the only human in Falcon Scott who wanted the colossal giant to walk faster. The siege souvenir could only be used once, so he had only one shot to shatter Goliath's stone carapace. Standing indifferently by his side, Saint raised the long javelin and placed it on her shoulder. The 4 shadows moved, fusing with her onyx armor. It shone with black radiance, and the feeling of great power emanating from the graceful figure of the taciturn stone knight instantly became much vaster, much deeper, and much more terrifying. At the same time, darkness flowed from Saint's gauntlet, slowly spreading across the length of the white javelin. Its whiteness was consumed, replaced by a lightless blackness. While the transcendent devil herself was augmented by the shadows, her weapon was now enhanced by the blade of darkness. There was the mantle of darkness, as well, which made Saint stronger when surrounded by darkness and shadows. Sonny summoned the shadow lantern, allowing it to consume all surrounding light. Soon the 3 of them, Sonny, Saint, and Jet, were hidden from sight within a circle of deep shadow. Almost there, the fastest of the nightmare creatures, those that had survived the barrage, meaning the strongest and most vile of them, were already moments away from reaching the wall, separating into 4 wide rivers of flesh to attack the 4 breaches. Goliath, meanwhile, was a few steps away from crossing half of the killing field. Sonny looked directly at the hateful giant and prepared to give Saint the command. At that moment, however, something changed. The Titan's massive, malformed head turned slightly, and his sole eye stared back. Sonny shivered. There were thousands and thousands of humans on the wall, and all of them must have looked like mere ants to Goliath. However, somehow, it felt as though the Titan was gazing directly at him. The weight of that gaze was almost physical. No, it was much more dire than that. Sonny gritted his teeth, feeling a very bad premonition grasp his heart. What? Then the milky surface of the giant's eye quivered and slid away like an eyelid. Behind it, a second eye was revealed. Unlike the first one, which was white and had neither an iris nor a pupil, that one was of a furious red color, as if made of pure magma, and had 3 incandescent pupils floating in its depths, like windows into a scorching inferno. Suddenly, Sonny was enveloped by unbearable heat. He felt water streaming down on him and looked up to see the snow clouds melting in the skies above. Bizarrely, it was raining in the middle of the polar winter. Beneath him, the 70-meter-tall defensive wall of the city suddenly moved and groaned. Glancing over the parapet, Sonny saw with horror that the impregnable alloy it was melting, too. All around him, the mighty MWPs were collapsing into puddles of liquid metal, the pilots screaming as they burned alive. The barrels of the powerful turrets disappeared into streams of incandescent drops, and the mighty railguns grew silent. A few meters away, Samara screamed and flinched back from her rifle, a vicious burn marring her cheek. Across the entire southern section of the city wall, the great defensive barrier bent and deformed, moments away from collapsing entirely. Countless people plummeted to their deaths or were consumed by the immolating heat. All of it happened in an instant. Gods! Knowing that there was no time to waste, Sonny shuddered as he changed his command slightly and sent it to Saint. The Onyx Knight instantly moved. Taking a single step, she raised the javelin behind her. For a moment, Saint's entire body turned into a graceful arch from the tip of her foot to her hip, to her shoulder, to her fist. Then her hand whipped forward, and the battlement under her shattered from immense pressure. Even her vambrace cracked, shards of onyx falling down like precious gems. At the last moment, the four shadows slid from her fingers and wrapped themselves around the siege souvenir. The long, immeasurably heavy javelin shot forward with the speed of lightning. Immediately, there was a deafening boom of sound, barriers being pierced, and a powerful shockwave rolled across the battlement, throwing people off their feet. The artificial memory streaked across the black sky like a line of pure darkness, creating a whirlpool of hurricane winds in its wake. A split second later, it hit Goliath right in the eye. There was a flash of light, and then a world-shaking thunderclap. And then the sound of shattering stone. The siege souvenir plunged right between the Titan's three pupils, disappearing into the red molten eye entirely. Then, it burst from the back of the giant's head in an explosion of broken stone. Your memory has been destroyed. As Sonny watched in stunned silence, vast cracks snaked through Goliath's head. The colossus froze in a strange pose, its torso leaning slightly back. His eye was completely destroyed and his head shattered and fell apart, giant slabs of stone plummeting down from a great height. The walking mountain swayed, twitched, and then slowly started to tilt. Everyone, both the humans and the nightmare creatures, froze, watching the Titan fall in utter shock. Sonny blinked. What just happened? As if responding, the spell whispered softly into his ear. You have slain a fallen Titan, minor shard of the stone Titan. Your shadow grows stronger. The colossal, headless body of Goliath tilted forward and then started to fall. Because of its enormous size, it seemed as though the giant's corpse slowly floated through the air instead of crashing down in an obliterating avalanche of stone. However, hundreds of nightmare creatures below were already panicking as they tried to flee and escape being crushed to death. Sonny froze, momentarily stunned. What just happened? He had killed the damned bastard. How? That was not what was supposed to happen. Sonny had poured countless hours into creating the siege souvenir and making sure that Saint would transcend in time. However, he had never expected to slay the fallen Titan with one strike. A Titan was a Titan. They were not supposed to die so easily. The plan was for the javelin to shatter the stone carapace on the chest of the giant, creating a path toward his heart. Master Jet was supposed to enter the breach and destroy Goliath's soul cores from within, while Sonny and Saint would attack from the outside. Together, they were meant to slowly bring the giant down, and maybe even survive the process. When the Titan had revealed his incandescent eye and started melting the city wall, Sonny was forced to switch targets and command Saint to aim for the eye instead. He had never thought that Goliath would be killed by that single strike. Was that eye the Titan's Achilles heel? Kim had not noticed a pronounced vulnerability after they encountered the giant on the coastal highway, though. Maybe her powers were not enough to see it. Or was the vulnerability only exposed when Goliath revealed his inner, hidden eye? In any case, the Titan was undoubtedly dead. Sonny had killed him. For a moment, a dark glee ignited in his heart. That's for Erebus Field, you foul bastard, and for me too. That is payback for almost killing me. But then his glee disappeared. By all accounts, Sonny should have felt exhilarated. He had killed a Titan after all. But instead of joy, he felt chills running down his spine. Suddenly tense, Sonny looked around. The armaments of the defensive barrier were all but destroyed, and the wall itself was damaged and deformed. A few sections had collapsed entirely, but most still stood. The defenders had suffered heavy losses, especially among the pilots burned to death with their MWPs. Many soldiers had lost their rifles, and the outer layers of their powered armor suits were severely damaged. However, there were still enough of them alive to continue the fight, maybe. Luckily, most awakened had managed to dismiss their steel memories, saving them from being destroyed, and were now summoning them back. Everyone was still in utter shock, mesmerized by the sight of the slowly toppling colossus. Something was wrong, though, very, very wrong. Goliath should not have died that easily or that fast. Master Jet, who had been hanging outside the wall, ready to push herself forward to follow the plan and attack the Titan, climbed back and looked at him, a rare expression of bewilderment written on her face. "Sonny, what the hell, how?" He lingered with the answer, staring past her at the falling mountain. "I don't know. I killed him, I did." Even before the body fell, wide cracks appeared all across it. Chunks of stone were splintering off and falling down. From the distance, it almost looked as if the giant had been diseased, his skin covered by sores and ulcers. And the cracks, behind some of them, instead of solid stone, there was nothing but darkness, as if parts of the Titan's body had been hollowed out long before the battle. Moments before the massive corpse crashed into the ground, Sonny's eyes widened. "Curse it!" In the next second, the colossal mass of stone collided against the earth, making the whole world shake. Enormous clouds of snow, dirt, and debris rose into the air, and countless nightmare creatures were crushed under the obliterating weight. A thunderous roar rolled over the killing field, and shards of stone shot outward like bullets, decimating even more abominations. One more section of the wall collapsed. However, that was not what Sonny was looking at. His gaze was locked on the massive corpse itself. When Goliath's body hit the ground, large portions of it cracked like the shell of a rotten egg, and from within, a tide of darkness flowed, eviscerating the few wounded nightmare creatures that still clung to life, and stretching toward the broken city wall like black tentacles. The heart of darkness. The river of black beetles had mysteriously disappeared some days ago, and almost at the same time, Goliath's speed had decreased. The beetles liked to tunnel through mountains and devour mighty creatures from within. The fallen Titan had been like a walking mountain himself, and mighty beyond belief as well. Someone should have guessed that the giant might have been parasitized by the legion of the tiny, dreadful creatures, but no one had. It was so clear in hindsight. Sonny himself had been too blinded by the threat of the Titan to consider such a possibility. His preconceived notions of what constituted power and his personal animosity against the stone giant resulted in a ruinous case of tunnel vision. Damn it! He glanced at the city defenses once again, realizing that almost everything that could have been used against vast swarms of tiny vermin had been destroyed by Goliath. The first army had been prepared to face one overwhelming enemy, not myriads of dangerous, but comparatively weak creatures. He looked at Jet, his lips trembling. "Bloodwave." She frowned. "What?" Sonny grabbed the Soul Reaper by the shoulders and barked. "Bloodwave, summon Bloodwave here. He's our best hope of stopping the heart of darkness." She hesitated for a short moment, then looked beyond the wall and hissed an explicit curse. Then, Jet took a step back and started summoning a memory that was supposed to give the fearsome saint a signal to abandon his duty of protecting the ships and join the battle. Sonny, meanwhile, was already moving, calling upon a few memories of his own. He had no idea how they would be able to handle both the vast horde of nightmare creatures that had come with Goliath and the tide of black beetles, with the defensive barrier ruined and barely holding. The wall was severely damaged, and many of the soldiers had either died or were rendered helpless, their weapons destroyed. And yet, they had no other choice but to fight and claw the victory out of fate's grasp somehow. There was simply nowhere to retreat. For a few moments, both Sunny and Jet stood motionless, staring at the tide of enemies advancing at the damaged wall. Their faces were grim. Eventually, Soul Reaper spoke in a dark tone. "This is bad. This is really bad." That was an understatement. Currently, Falcon Scott was facing two threats. The first one was the uncountable horde of nightmare creatures that had followed Goliath, and was now flowing across the killing field like a dark tide. Some of them had already reached the deformed barrier and engaged the defenders of the breaches in a furious melee. Some infiltrated the city through the new fissures in the melted wall and were now rampaging in the staging area. With the turrets destroyed and the mighty railguns heavily damaged, there was no way to slow down the advance of the horde. Even the MWPs were destroyed, and most of the soldiers had either lost their weapons or were seriously injured. The only ones who remained relatively unscathed were the awakened. There were around 700 of them on the southern section of the wall, and most were still able to fight. There were reinforcements coming from the other 3 sections of the wall, but it was going to take some time for them to arrive. Time that they did not have. The second threat was the Heart of Darkness. 4 rivers of dark beetles were flowing toward the ravaged wall, reaching for it like giant black claws. Each individual beetle was capable of biting through powerful armor-type memories, metal, and flesh. Their only redeeming quality was that the tiny vermin were not too hard to crush, which was why Army Command had planned to rely heavily on the powerful defensive armaments, in case the Dark Swarm showed up. With those armaments mostly destroyed, the danger posed by the Heart of Darkness had risen tremendously. There were several ascended with aspects suitable to face such an enemy, as well, but some of them had died in the past 2 weeks, while others were not on the southern section of the wall, since no one had expected the Heart of Darkness to attack this day. "Damn it." Gritting his teeth, Sunny looked at Jet. "So what do we do?" At that time, a familiar flaming arrow, albeit much weaker than it had been during the battle against the devouring cloud, flew into the mass of beetles from somewhere much further down the wall. Winter was still alive, at least. Master Jet let out an angry hiss. There is no choice but to retreat to the secondary defense perimeter and enact the following protocol. However, even that is impossible right now. If we don't want to lose the city, we need to push the horde back and give the men enough time to run. We also need to obliterate the damned bugs. Push back the horde. Sunny suddenly felt cold. There were so many holes in the city wall now that it was basically useless. That meant that the only way to stall the abominations was to sortie out and face the nightmare creatures on the killing field, blade against claw. Needless to say, that was nearly a suicide mission. Even if the defenders of Falcon Scott succeeded, their losses would be staggering. There was another option, of course. The awakened could abandon the mundane soldiers and run. Logically speaking, leaving mundanes to die and preserving the arguably more valuable asset was a valid strategy. War was not a purely logical affair, though the most reasonable strategy was not always the best strategy. Things like spirit, morale, and mutual trust had much greater weight than Sunny had once thought. Any army without these intangible qualities would be doomed. As a colonel and an ascended, Master Jet was the senior officer on the southern section of the wall and the person in charge. The decision was hers, and Sunny did not envy her position one bit. She lingered for a few moments, then took a deep breath and shouted, her voice spreading far and wide due to the effects of a special memory. "This is Soul Reaper Jet. All awakened, assemble in cohorts and prepare to sortie. We must push the enemy back. All mundane personnel abandon the wall. I repeat, abandon the wall. I am ordering a full retreat to the secondary defense line." As soon as the echo of her voice disappeared into the cold night, Jet stepped toward a messenger that had lost his footing during the Titan's attack, grabbed the man by the collar, and pulled him to his feet with one powerful motion. The slightly disoriented soldier stared at her with a pale face. She looked at him somberly for a moment, and then said quietly, "Inform Army Command to prepare the Rampart Protocol and be ready to activate it as soon as I give the command. If I die, they should act at their discretion." The frightened man nodded and disappeared, using his aspect ability to run at incredible speed. With that done, Jet glanced at Sunny. She remained silent for a moment, then smiled darkly. "Are you ready?" Sunny shook his head. "Not even a little bit." Soul Reaper laughed and turned to the killing field. Her smile disappeared like a phantom. "Well, tough. While the awakened are fighting off the nightmare creatures, someone has to deal with the bugs. They absolutely cannot be allowed to enter the city. I'll stop the left swarm. Send that awesome echo of yours to face the middle left one and go to the middle right yourself. Bloodwave will handle the last one. With some luck, the Ascended who were supposed to deal with them in the first place will arrive to reinforce us before everyone dies. The couple of them who are still alive." Sunny looked at her with a dubious expression. "How am I supposed to fight against countless thousands of tiny bugs?" Master Jet sighed. "You're resourceful. Figure something out, and if you do, let me know. I'm asking myself the same question." With that, she turned away to give orders to her cohort. Sunny did the same. Belle, Dorn, Samara, Luster, and Kim were looking at him, their eyes uncertain. He forced out a smile. "You all heard the boss. We are going to sortie with the rest, then push forward and block one of the beetle's swarms. I'll take point. Samara, you lost your rifle, so just blast any that get past me with essence. You'll be our secondary slayer. Luster, support Sam. Belle, Dorn, and Kimmy, you guys will protect Luster and Samara. Don't let the bugs bite through your armor." His soldiers looked at each other, then silently nodded. A few moments later, Soul Reaper's voice rolled across the battlements once again. "Attack!" The special chutes built into the wall had mostly been destroyed or damaged, so the Awakened had to use other means to sortie into the killing field. Some rappelled down, some summoned memories capable of slowing one's fall, some simply used the exposed framework of the Great Barrier to swiftly climb to the ground. The few surviving masters stationed on the southern wall went first to clear the landing. Saint mounted Nightmare, who leaped from one protruding sheet of deformed alloy to another, reaching the swarming abominations in mere seconds. Wielding the cruel sight, she quickly slaughtered the nearest enemies. Sunny was not far behind. He glided through the air using the dark wing, then dismissed it a couple dozen meters above the ground and plummeted down, landing among the nightmare creatures like a cannonball. The sin of solace danced, effortlessly slicing through flesh and bone. It took Sunny only a few seconds to carve out a small island of safety. The members of his cohort joined him, forming a beachhead. More Awakened followed behind them, grim determination shining in their eyes. Everyone knew that for many, if not most of them, this was going to be the last fight. Nevertheless, no one tried to flee or turn back. It is strange. Cutting down a lunging beast, Sunny glanced at the descending Awakened. Surely, all of them valued their lives. Maybe if left alone, most would listen to their fear and their desire to survive, and choose to save themselves instead. However, they had all been swept up in the moment and lost their reason. They were all individuals, but more than that, they were also parts of something much larger right now. A crowd, a mob, a collective had no fear of death, because the destruction of one of its small parts did not mean the destruction of the whole. Maybe that was how these people suppressed their utterly natural and reasonable desire to live, knowing that even without them, the larger entity they belonged to would continue to exist. Was that what Professor Obel had meant when he said that humanity needed a bit of stupidity to survive. In any case, the feeling was alien to Sonny. He had spent most of his life being refused and rejected by the collective, so naturally, he valued himself more. There was really nothing more valuable than himself, and things he personally held dear. And yet, here he was, charging into the horde of nightmare creatures with the rest of the awakened of the First Army. Of course, his situation was vastly different. Sonny was pretty sure of his ability to at least escape alive, no matter what happened. But he was still taking a great risk for no apparent reason. Was it stubbornness? Was it pride? Was it spite and unwillingness to admit defeat? Or had he actually become infatuated by the same sense of collective responsibility as these selfless people? He truly did not know. However, the word selfless seemed rather vile and frightening to Sonny. After all, his self was all he had. Without it, what was the point of staying alive? Gritting his teeth, Sonny brandished the sin of solace and pushed forward, cutting through one abomination after another like a ruthless, eerily graceful butcher. At some point, his three shadows joined him, wrapping themselves around his body, the fourth one he had sent to help Nightmare. Sonny was surrounded by a fine haze of blood, but whenever drops of it fell on his black tunic, they rolled off the soft silk without leaving the slightest trace. The graceless dusk remained immaculately pristine. He left the hundreds of awakened behind and advanced into the horde, leading his cohort toward the river of black beetles. Luckily, it was not very hard to reach, because the dark river was flowing forward to meet them as well. Before the irregulars clashed with the claw of the heart of darkness, though, Bloodwave finally arrived at the battlefield. The mighty saint landed like a falling star, causing the earth to split and a shockwave to spread outward in all directions. Away from water, most of his powers would be of no use. But a transcendent was still a transcendent. Wearing dark gray armor sewn of sharkskin and wielding two curved swords, Bloodwave instantly turned into a whirlwind of steel, moving with such speed and force as to resemble an annihilating blur. Countless nightmare creatures disappeared into it, and the blurry twister instantly turned red from the mass of blood. More than that, the champion of the House of Night was perfectly aware of his vulnerability on land. For that reason, his soul arsenal included many powerful memories to account for that weakness, among other things. As soon as Bloodwave appeared, three echoes manifested by his side. One was a monstrous crab the size of a house, one resembled a towering golem of wet clay, and the last one was ethereal and elusive, like a creature made of fog. Sonny's eyes glinted when he realized that the creature shrouded in fog was actually transcendent itself. It would have been powerless underwater, but here under the walls of Falcon Scott, the echo could exert truly devastating power. A small shadow fell from the sky, and a familiar black bird landed on Bloodwave's shoulder, cawing something into his ear. A moment later, the saint and his echoes changed direction, heading for one of the four rivers of darkness. Maybe we can actually pull this off. Throwing all unnecessary thoughts out of his head, Sonny concentrated on carving a path toward the tide of beetles. Somewhere behind him, hundreds of awakened were desperately pushing against the horde of frenzied abominations, killing and dying without holding anything back. An ear-splitting groan of tearing metal thundered as another section of the wall collapsed, unable to withstand its own weight after suffering severe damage to its inner structure. He paid it no attention. How am I supposed to fight against the damned bugs? The sin of solace could cut through dozens with each swipe, but there were countless thousands of them. Trying to kill the entire swarm with a sword was no different from trying to cut the sea. He had a couple of tools capable of mass destruction, shadow manifestation, the strike of thunder. He could also control the swarm somewhat with the dying wish. Best of all, the beetles would have to try very, very hard to bite through the marble shell. Sonny was not too worried about his defense. It was the offense that posed an issue. I guess I'll just have to manage somehow. A few moments later, the mass of nightmare creatures around them diminished, and those who did lunge at the cohort looked more panicked than consumed by bloodlust. It seemed that the heart of darkness cared not about whom it devoured, humans or abominations. And there, behind these last few monsters, the tide of darkness was rushing toward Sunny once again. As the river of darkness surged forward to devour Sunny, the small lantern of black stone hanging on his belt opened, and a tide of shadows rose from within it to meet the swarm of beetles. He held nothing back, unleashing every wild shadow he had tamed, from mundane and shallow ones to those that were ancient, vast, and unfathomably deep. The night itself seemed to move as well. It moved to answer the call of the Master of Shadows. Two dark tides met with a deafening thunder, and thousands of beetles were instantly broken, crushed, and ground into black dust. Some shadows were vanquished, too, and yet even more persisted. Permeated by Sunny's essence, they were as deadly and resilient as an ascended weapon would be. With no sun and no moon to illuminate the skies, there was nothing but dim starlight and a few distant flames to chase away the darkness. The whole world was shrouded in shadows, and so Sunny had an almost infinite well of them to call upon. The only limitation was his essence. However, the number of beetles was even more limitless. Despite thousands of them being destroyed in the initial confrontation, it was no more than a drop in the ocean. Already, even more were surging forward, crashing into the wall of shadows and tunneling into it with their sharp mandibles. Gritting his teeth, Sunny poured more essence out, strengthening the wall and turning it into a tall dam. Almost instantly, cracks appeared on its surface, and a moment later, the river of dark beetles overflowed, spilling over the top of the dam and spreading wide to encompass it from the sides. Funneled by the dying wish, all of them rushed toward a single point, Sunny himself. Die. He launched himself forward, moving with enough speed to leave afterimages behind. The sin of solace lashed out, slicing through 24 beetles with a single strike. Almost at the same time, a radiant orb of charged essence shot past Sunny and violently exploded in the surging mass of darkness. Samara had joined the fight, using her aspect ability directly instead of channeling it through the tungsten rounds of a rifle. Together, they managed to slow the beetles down a little. Sunny turned into a whirlwind of annihilating jade, delivering half a dozen swift attacks in an instant. However, even though cutting through the small creatures was not too hard, the effectiveness of these attacks was low. Almost instantly, he switched to using the flat of the jade blade to crush them. With his strength, each blow sent a concussive wave through the mass of dreadful pests, damaging and breaking their tough little bodies. His mind was split, one part commanding his body, the other controlling the manifested shadows to hold back the dark river. And yet it was not enough. Damnation! No matter how fast Sunny moved and how many blows he delivered, the number of beetles was simply overwhelming. Already, many had flowed past him. Some tried to turn around to attack from behind, but the pressure of the thousands more pushing forward brought them away, forcing Belle, Dorn, and Kim to engage the creatures in melee. Out of the three, Dorn was able to destroy the most with his aspect abilities and the heavy sledgehammer. Belle used himself as bait, phasing from place to place, and using his sword to cut down as many small creatures as he could. Kim, with her rapier and buckler, was the least suited for this battle, but she did her best to lessen the pressure on the two formidable warriors. Behind them, Samara continued to charge small beads of alloy with essence and flicking them into the mass of beetles, each streaking through the air like a bullet and exploding into a wave of destructive force. Once her supply of alloy beads and needles was exhausted, she would have to use the crudest form of attack and simply toss out projectiles formed of unrestrained, wild essence. They were holding for now, but the tide of dark beetles was growing more and more overbearing with each moment. Their number endlessly swelled, and the dam of shadows was being continuously destroyed and rebuilt, consuming Sunny's essence like a gluttonous beast. Some distance away to his right, Bloodwave and his echoes had engaged another tentacle of the heart of darkness. To his left, Saint and Nightmare were holding back the third, and further still, behind them, Jet and her cohort were fighting the fourth. This isn't working, this is not enough. Sunny knew that, if nothing changed, he and his soldiers would be devoured by the appalling vermin. Already, many of the dark beetles had gotten past his defenses and bitten into his skin. Their sharp mandibles only left shallow scratches on it, which almost immediately healed, but still. The memory of one of these vile creatures crawling inside his rib cage made him shudder. It was only a matter of time before several bites would turn into a dozen, then 100, then 1,000. Would the marble shell be able to withstand countless thousands of mandibles plunging into it? Even if it did, it was only his skin that was so resilient. Once he was buried under a cold, slithering carpet of darkness, the beetles crawling into his mouth, into his nostrils, into his ears, into his eyes. Would he be devoured from within? The Sin of Solace laughed. Wouldn't that be a sight to behold? Ah, yes, yes, it would, I can't wait. Uttering a silent curse, Sunny tried to pay the whispers of the Jade Sword no attention, and concentrated on eviscerating as many of the beetles as he could. I need to think of something. He could always use Shadow Step to escape. Not quite. The last time, a few beetles were pulled along with him as he stepped through the shadows, most likely because the small creatures were not, in fact, alive. Not alive. A bizarre idea suddenly appeared in his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Even if it worked, he would only be buying himself a few seconds of respite at most. What Sunny really needed was to enhance his offensive ability, to find a way to destroy many more beetles every moment. However, he was only human. There was only so much that his small body, no matter how strong, could do. No, his best hope was shadow manifestation. He was already using it to hold the river back and grind many beetles into dust, but that was not enough. Was there anything else he could do? Summoning a dozen shadow hands to crush and obliterate the beetles would work for a bit, but it would also burn his reserves of essence with terrible speed. Those hands would not be able to strike with as much strength as he himself could, as well. Damn it! If Serpent was here, I could have ordered it to assume the form of a massive monster and crush thousands of the damned vermin with each step. Consumed by revulsion and fear at the thought of being eaten from the inside, driven to his limits, and desperate to find a way to defeat the river of darkness. At that feverish moment, Sunny suddenly felt something click in his head. Scraps and pieces of previously accumulated experiences connected together, forming a tentative hint of a revelation. The revelation was strange, unclear, and dubious. That should not be possible, right? However, he really could not see why not. Sunny sensed the endless ocean of formless shadows around him, all malleable and ready to answer his call. If Soul Serpent was not here to assume the shape of a dreadful monster, why not try to turn into one himself? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.